Nee, ich lese das schon alles. Ja, das Problem ist aber bei, ach sie, kann ich die Kamera nicht ausmachen. Ich mach die mal kurz weg, weil dann kann ich das essen. Reacts auf andere Reacts immer schwierig so, ne?
From school when you run to turn on the Xbox 360, see a party invite, stray away from your friend to jump on the new Call of Duty. After hours of playing, no matter winning or losing, you're still having fun. When your friend comes off for dinner, you decide to jump on a game like Skyrim for a couple of hours and just enjoy some fantasy fun. Finding the massive world impressive, but not being aware of why you find it so impressive or even amazing. The childhood naivety of gaming is something that I think all of us wish we could just fall back into. I remember when the Assassin's Creed 3 trailer came out and I was so hyped to play this game. It would have been the first Assassin's Creed game that I was playing that I knew about before it was coming up to release. So I was hyped, and leading up to it, one of the biggest channels on YouTube at the time, Smosh, made a music video talking about it, and it just kind of brought in even more hype for the game. I asked my mum if she could pre-order the game from Argos for me so that the day it came out I could just jump straight into it. Then the day finally came. 20th of October 2012, Assassin's Creed 3 finally came out. It was one of the biggest step-ups in the franchise since the second game. I would wake up an hour earlier before school just so that I could play it before going. I remember walking around the snow in New York area, turning off my console to then walk in the snow as well at school. This was at the time where in the UK it actually snowed during the winter, which is something that rarely happens now. All of this childhood nostalgia mixed with naivety of the gaming world,
Ist aber oft so, man erwartet mehr, als man kriegt.
Fun possible, even by yourself. With every game coming out
Außer
being
manchmal.
a step up from the prior, you had AC1 to AC2 to Brotherhood. All three games were just a one-up of each other in some level. Where they then jumped to 3, where it took what they already knew and worked to make it something even better. Which at the time wasn't
Aber
viewed
das war ein
that way,
geiles Spiel.
but in fact, looking back, was actually a great experience. Each Call of Duty was a step up from the next. Halo 4 became bigger in every single way from Halo 3. GTA 5 was one of the biggest jumps in gaming that we've ever seen and probably won't see until GTA 6. And then we also had many new IPs entering the franchise, and we had so many amazing games coming out within this time period of games like The Last of Us, GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Dishonored, Shadow of Mordor, Borderlands 2, then leading to games mid of that decade coming Shadow of Mordor, Borderlands.
Shadow of Mordor, aber auch nur der erste Teil. Der zweite, den fand ich nicht mehr so geil. Ja, Borderlands 2, aber das sagen viele. Borderlands 2 war gut. Okay.
Borderlands 2, then leading to games mid of that decade coming out with stuff like The Witcher 3. For me, I would class 2010 to 20...
Von Shadow of Mordor, echt? Der ist cool. Aber ich weiß nicht, ich fand den ersten irgendwie besser. Also den kann man schon spielen, natürlich, aber ich fand den trotzdem besser, den ersten. Hat mich mehr gehuckt.
2015 as the Renaissance era of gaming, letting the art drive the ship, whereas during 2016 to 2021 became the Industrial Revolution, where they were able to just churn out games and make a profit, going higher and higher every single time, testing tons of systems to...
Nicht nur. Der erste... Der zweite ist genauso. Also da ist nichts anders. Der erste hat halt von vielen Spielen die Sachen genommen. Assassin's Creed, Batman. Also dass du halt die Türme da machen musst, klettern kannst, das ist Assassin's Creed, aber das Kampfsystem ist von Batman und ich glaube, deswegen war der erste Teil auch so cool. Weil dieses Free-Flow-Kampfsystem von Batman, das war einfach sick, das war insane. Und ich glaube, deswegen ist auch Gotham Knights so ein bisschen gefloppt, weil das Kampfsystem scheiße war. Und der Rest auch.
To see which way they could make more money. At the time, we were fine with it, as generally there wasn't a ton of backlash. But all of that would end up ending by 2018, where people started to realize truly what was happening.
Für Fortnite.
That was due to the success of one
jetzt auch
primary game. Obviously, there was some backlash before it, but Fortnite blew up and
Scheiße, die
everyone
Soße war voll
was going
scharf.
a bit crazy.
While the others are recruiting, I'm farming.
A game that sure was made by one of the biggest companies in gaming, but at the time when it came out, the first 4 seasons of this game was extremely unpolished and very basic. But it was doing better than every single COD game that had come out from the 3 years prior. How did a free-to-play game outperform the rest in this entire market? Well, I think one of the first things to consider obviously is the low barrier to entry. Just owning a console of some sort allowed you to play it, and the childhood fun coming back once again for the masses to be able to compete side by side in a gaming world that really we hadn't been in for so long. You could just jump on and your friends or just by yourself and have tons of fun. When I was younger, I remember being able to play for hours on end without any issues. I'd be able to jump on at 4 PM right after school and then play every single night until 10 or 11 PM. I was able to do this because everything was new. I wanted to be better than all of my friends no matter what. I never wanted to be on the same level as them in terms of a competitive standpoint. I simply enjoyed everything I played because my friends also played tons of them. It wasn't just online games that was the case either. That was also single player games. Being able to walk to school, for example, or watch Videos on YouTube, talking
Ja, was heißt zum Glück? Also ich find's witzig, wenn du es mit anderen spielst. Das ist aber ja bei den meisten Spielen so. Ja, Apex ist halt im Grunde genau das Gleiche. Ich glaube, Fortnite ist mehr gebalanced als Apex. Aber ja, muss jeder auch irgendwie für sich wissen. Ich fand's eigentlich okay als Spiel. War fein, man konnte es gut spielen, macht Spaß. Aber es kommt auch immer drauf an, was hast du für Leute, mit denen du spielst. Wenn du jetzt jemanden hast, mit dem du, keine Ahnung, 3, 4, 5 Stunden meinetwegen ein Spiel spielen kannst, dann ist cool. Ansonsten finde ich es halt langweilig. Also dann mache ich in Smite auch nur 1 oder vielleicht mal 2 Matches, das war's. Aber auch, ja, dann kein Bock mehr. Ja. Wir haben dann rumgeheult wegen dem Bauen und jetzt brauchst du nicht mehr bauen in Fortnite. Ja. Ja, was heißt rumgeheult? Viele haben das ja auch, du konntest das ja auch als Vorteil nutzen, ne? Das Bauen. Und jetzt ist es halt nicht mehr drin, ja. Aber so, das Spiel hat schon Spaß gemacht. Ich fand das Bauen auch ein bisschen mehr störend als hilfreich, aber bin ich zu alt für. Wahrscheinlich. Bin ich zu alt, ja.
Gaming, and whilst it was in its prime, especially back then when YouTube gaming was blowing up and becoming the main course of everything going on in life, at least for obviously people who are between the ages of like 10 and 15. And now I can maybe play a game for like an hour, then I'm wanting to come off. Why is that? Well, I think the first way of discussing that primary topic is going to be talking about the modern day state of gaming across the board. I feel like gaming has hit a plateau where it's the same as the tech world, where gaming and tech can't really improve massively between each entry. It is slow changes over time, whereas back in the day, every game was a step up in terms of graphics, storytelling, everything, but really, one of those can still be improved no matter what, but they just choose to ignore it. Every new iPhone or Samsung phone are always improved from the last, but by
Ich glaube, das ist auch so ein Punkt, warum, glaube ich, viele Dark Souls ganz cool finden. Oder so die Spiele, die in die Richtung gehen. Du kannst stumpf durchlaufen und die kann alles scheißegal sein. Du hast ein bisschen Story, die wird ein bisschen was erklärt. Aber die Hintergrundgeschichte der Welt ist nichts, was machen ja andere Spiele, die erklären dir, wie ist es dazu gekommen, dass es jetzt ist, wie es ist und warum ist der jetzt, wie er ist. Das musst du selbst herausfinden, aufgrund von Items, aufgrund von irgendwelchen Texten, die irgendwo sind oder, ne, das wird dir halt nicht so offensichtlich in die Fresse geklatscht. Und ich glaube, das macht auch viel Dark Souls aus. Oder Souls-like Games, so im Allgemeinen jetzt. Und die Bosse sind ganz cool. Manche, nicht alle, aber manche sind cool. Auch manche Gegner, manche nicht, manche ja. Manches ist cool, manches ist nicht.
Margins that really it doesn't warrant having an entirely brand new phone every single.
Finde ich aber in manchen Spielen wichtig. Weil vor allem in wirklich großen Open Worlds bin ich ganz ehrlich, wenn dir da nicht gesagt wird, wo du hin sollst, dann bist du verloren. Wenn du keine Ahnung hast, ja, weiß ich nicht, was für ein gutes Beispiel. Skyrim, wenn du nicht weißt, wo du hin musst, Bruder, dann gehst du erstmal 5 Stunden in die falsche Richtung, kommst du an, oh, bin ich falsch. Ach, scheiße, wieder zurück. Aber Dark Souls sind ja auch nicht die großen Open Worlds, also da finde ich, klar, also wobei die Spiele guiden dich irgendwie schon, aber sie machen es auf eine sehr smarte Art und Weise. Das ist halt nicht so ein In-die-Fresse-Ding, ne? Also die wird schon subtil gesagt, ey, hier sollst du noch gar nicht sein, geh mal lieber woanders hin. Du kannst es natürlich trotzdem probieren und du kannst es auch schaffen. Das Spiel legt dir da jetzt nicht die großen Steine in den Weg. Aber du kriegst schon mit, wo du hin sollst. Weil ansonsten würdest du nicht durch die Spiele finden. So, ne?
Year. But why do we end up feeling like every single phone has changed every single year? It's because they decide to change it physically, so it looks like there is a big change. With games, it's the exact same issue. Just replace the iPhone with COD and Samsung with 90% of the AAA titles
Das heißt ja nicht umsonst auch
that are coming
Code.
out. The reason why this became such a massive issue is that companies didn't want to move the ball forward at all. They only
Immer der
wanted to
gleiche
move an
Scheiß halt.
inch if that meant that they made millions from that tiny change. The big issue with the gaming world was when it became such a pathological idea behind money making over the creativity and love for the craft that completely got obliterated once companies realized how much money there is in the gaming sphere. The people who make the decisions at these big companies typically don't play games, and if they do, maybe they play it every now and again, or they play it with their kids or grandkids. People who went to uni for game development, or people who got into voice acting because they loved games, just ended up being destroyed by the machine that is modern day gaming. Companies like Ubisoft and Activision know that they'll make a load of money by putting out a load of subpar games instead of risking it to make even more
COD,
money
keine Ahnung.
because they make an amazing game. Last year was the first ever time Activision decided to take
Da
a year off of
bin ich-
making Call of Duty games.
COD habe ich
It was
nie
the
wirklich
same for
gespielt.
Ubisoft, because back when they released Assassin's Creed Syndicate, it
Modern
was
Warfare
met with a lot of backlash
1
because there was
oder
nothing
2?
changing in
Ist
the
eines der
franchise.
besten, das
They
weiß
took a year off and released Origins, a game that to this
Oder
day
soll.
I still think is one of the
COD
best
ist
Assassin's
nicht meine
Creed
Reihe.
games. Which is overall a good
1.
thing. Them taking a year off is proof that they know that something needed to change. Work had to be put in to release good games. But due to the corporatization and the lack of willingness to try new projects,
Ist aber genauso jetzt ähnlich, kann man ganz gut auf ein ganz neues Spiel. Es kommt ja Counter-Strike 2 raus. Es gab ja Counter-Strike und Counter-Strike 1.6 und CSGO. Das hat es ja einfach nur alles ein bisschen verbessert. Das ist ja das gleiche Spiel, so mehr oder weniger. Und Counter-Strike 2 ist genau das gleiche Spiel, grafisch halt nur besser. Wahrscheinlich noch hier und da ein bisschen was verändert, aber sonst the same so. Und es ist bei vielen neuen Spielen ja auch so. Es ist das gleiche, was man schon kennt, halt nur anders. Aber gleich.
people ended up with the same game that was slightly improved year to year. Now we're at the point where games just can't improve dramatically when it comes to the graphics or audio. The quality is pretty much as high as it can be. The only way that games can improve now is by having a compelling story and world design that's actually intriguing to run around. I end up finding myself wanting to run around Elden Ring, for example, a game that I suck at, I get destroyed in. I do not do well in Souls-like games. However, there is something about the world design in that game that is phenomenal in comparison to all of the Ubisoft games when it comes to the new generation.
Okay, was machst du bei Kondition Zero? Dann bleibst du immer nur stehen und musst dich drehen, um zu schießen. Ist auch geil.
Assassin's Creed. I don't want to run around Viking England in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where the world is so dull that you end up putting your horse into auto sprint and looking at TikTok or YouTube for 15 minutes until your horse gets to your destination. But it's not just down to the creative compression that's gone on within the gaming world, but it's also the fact that there's a lack of just excitement for new releases in the gaming world right now. Now, the lack of care for the new releases, to me, comes down to two main things. One is just growing up, and the second thing, like I've previously discussed, when you were a kid, everything you played was new. Everything was always a brand new experience. When I played GTA 4 when I was younger, I thought that was the only thing of its kind. But that was the fourth game in the main line of the franchise. When I played Saints Row 2 for the first time, I loved that game and that's the only Saints Row game that I truly enjoyed. But
ich glaube aber heutzutage, die kennen GTA 5, vielleicht GTA 4, aber nur vielleicht. Alles davor Da denken sich, okay, das heißt einfach GTA 5, dass es da 4 Teile vorher gab. Wenn die GTA einspielen würden, boah, die würden sagen, was ist denn das für eine Scheiße? Die meisten, denke ich. GTA 1 und 2 waren schon cool. GTA 3 war dann so das erste, was wirklich 3D-Welt war, und das war einfach so mindfucking. Boah, ich habe damals GTA 1 gespielt. Und noch diese Draufsicht, Vogelperspektive, war übelst weird zu spielen, damals auch, aber es war cool. Dann kam der zweite, dann gab es, glaube ich, noch GTA London. Und dann kam der dritte Teil. Der dritte Teil, boah, der war so, also das war wirklich der absolute Shit. Das war einfach fucking awesome, das Spiel zu spielen. Wenn du dir das jetzt anguckst, denkst du, ich weiß ja nicht. Dann kam San Andreas. San Andreas, absolut gutes Spiel. Wenn du dir das heute anguckst, ich weiß ja nicht. Also rein optisch. Spielerisch macht's immer noch Bock, hat natürlich spielerisch ist das gealtert, klar. Ne? 4 geht, glaube ich, noch ganz gut klar. Aber viele wissen gar nicht, dass es so andere Spiele, andere GTA-Spiele gibt. Die denken auch, GTA San Andreas, boah, ist neu. Und dann denken die sich, warum sieht das so scheiße aus?
At that point of time, again, I thought that was the only thing like it and that there was no way of improving it. But then after growing up, you start to realize things. For example, the Saints Row franchise all
Wobei man sagen muss, mit GTA 3 angefangen zu haben, ist nichts Schlechtes. Weil das war das erste 3D-GTA und das war es einfach. Du konntest ein Flugzeug fliegen, ne? Irgendwie.
take massive inspiration
Fast.
from GTA. Skyrim was the 5th game in a 2-decade-long franchise, but to me it was the first of its kind. I could keep going with a mixture of childish ignorance about the world itself and the lack of knowledge in the gaming world specifically. But due to the lack of knowledge, it actually made gaming a great experience, and I think this is something that people don't
Bei
talk
Skyrim
about when
könnte
they're
man
talking
denken,
about the
Rob,
nostalgia of games. They solely put it down to a
dass man
we
da
just
nicht drauf
love the
kommt, kann ich
games
sogar
when we were
verstehen, dass da
growing
schon
up.
4
But it's because
Vorgänger gab.
those experiences were new experiences to us. We didn't have a critical eye at that point. A lot of people try to defend the stance that it's not because we grew up, it's just that games became stale and boring. I agree with half of that statement. The half that I agree with is the stale and boring part of the statement. However, I do also think that people who complain about games being bad are a lot of the time the people who also play the same types of games over and over again, such as the FPS types. When the new COD game isn't good, they believe that gaming is ruined. When Halo is boring, they believe again the industry sucks and that everything about it is bad. But instead of them taking some time out of their days to play something really interesting and play an amazing story-rich game that came before many of the COD games, for example, or even games recent like Red Dead 2 where you get an amazing story, they don't want to do that because they view it as a waste of time. Why would they spend so many hours in a game like Red Dead when really they could play COD every hour, every day, and apparently get the same level of fun? Another part of getting older is the realization that gaming truly doesn't matter. Before you start writing in the comment sections about how you're a 25 or 40-year-old man who loves playing games and still talks about it all the time, just remember that you are not the majority of people. Most men and women do not care about games in the first place, let alone started playing them. It's not until really my generation, which is, for example, Gen Z and Millennials, where you have that barrier where so many people played games. I remember so many people in school who played games. This was across the board, no matter who they were. They tried playing games because it was a great hobby to play when you're younger. You could sink so much time into it. With a lot of people holding the belief of gaming being dead comes down to the realization that gaming truly doesn't matter. Adulting starts to kick in and you become aware of a lot more things outside of this bubble that most of us who loved games growing up were sat in for so long. Now, what you should and shouldn't care about is not what I'm talking about here. I believe that gaming is obviously a hobby. It's something that should be put in and categorized as such. For example, a lot of people who say the words gaming is a waste of time also are the same sorts of people who go and spend 2 hours of their life watching a football match.
Ja. Auf irgendeine Art und Weise ist, kann man sagen, Zeitverschwendung. Aber vieles Zeitverschwendung. Aber das ist halt eine Zeitverschwendung, die macht Spaß. Manchmal. Öfters. Ja. Warum nicht? Theoretisch ist ganz viel, was wir machen, Zeitverschwendung. Ein Tier zu haben, sich um ein Tier zu kümmern, mit dem rauszugehen, ist auch Zeitverschwendung, weil in der Zeit könntest du ja wieder was Produktiveres machen. Ne? Wenn du das so siehst, was für uns selbst tun, irgendein Hobby ausüben oder was weiß ich, ist auch Zeitverschwendung. Oder du könntest ja was Produktives. Es kommt immer auf die Sicht an, die du hast.
Every Saturday, then discussing it for hours on end throughout the week, and they basically become walking contradictions. It's depressing, but becoming aware that responsibility strips us of our innate childlike persona that will always be there, but only comes out of very
Oder zumindest sollte es Zeitvertreib sein und nicht in Arbeit ausarten. Für jemanden, der nur spielt.
specific things, as we've basically been trained most of our lives to put that aside because obviously we have to start stepping up to becoming an adult. A big part of adulting is that realization of how much games cost. How is The Last of Us Part 1 £70? It's a remake, sure, but come on, that's ridiculous. Overall, it's not just because it's the same game from before, just with updated graphics. That's not my issue with the game. It's the fact that £70 is a ridiculous amount of money to be paying for a game. Sure, people may use the argument of, well, you go out and you spend £70 on stuff. Currently, I don't. I still have no money. Most of my money is gone purely because, guess what? My car costs over £70 to fill up. It's stupid. It's not even like you could turn around and say, well, the cost of everything's going up, so we need to start charging the game more.
Wie viel sind 70 Pfund? Okay. Das sind 80 Euro. Ja, kommt drauf an, wie oft man tanken muss, ne?
Because it's not that. Most of these games that come out at £70 already have a ridiculous amount of monetization in them. It makes people not want to play games because there's such a high barrier to entry now that you have to pay £70 to play a game, and even £50 for some games.
Wenn ich das sehe, kriege ich gerade übelst Bock, Ghost of Tsushima zu spielen
when
auf
they're like
dem
5
PC.
years old. It's absurd. As let's
Zumindest
say you're
60
earning
FPS, da hatte ich übelst Bock
£1,200 a
drauf.
month, maybe £1,500 a month. The average salary, for example, in the UK, if you're on a living wage, you're going to be getting just around £1,500.
Aber ich will mir jetzt dafür keine PS5 kaufen und dann nochmal das Spiel, weil das wäre dumm.
Home less than that if you just go off of minimum wage. It still ends up becoming a
Aber
massive
the
chunk
same
of
ist
your
auch
money
mit
from all of the money that you end up having left over after all of your bills. I still live with my parents and will do for some
Last of
time.
Us
I
2.
know that I will not be
Auch
able
so
to
Bock
afford
auf
the
60
newest games
FPS spielen.
right away all the time. It's something that I've had to come to accept. When after everything comes out of my account, I'm only left with like £120 to maybe £200 a month. And paying £60 for a game just isn't doable. Everything is going up in price, so I'm not fully surprised, obviously. Like, yes, I said earlier how, for example, it's ridiculous because everything's going in price, you can't use that as an argument. But, again, it's like one of those things where people can use it and people will defend that argument, so I guess, sure. But when you consider that there's so many multiplayer titles out there that make tons of money, that have not needed to increase the price. Let's talk about two of the most popular games in history, Fortnite and Minecraft. Fortnite and Minecraft, for example, are, like I said, two of the most profitable games in history to ever be made. One of them is free and makes tons of money from microtransactions. I'm fine with that being a system that earns money. The game initially is free. You don't need to buy the microtransactions. You're getting value for literally paying nothing. I don't believe all games should be free, so don't worry, don't take it like that. I believe games should be charged for, but when...
Wobei man ja auch sagen muss, es gibt ja viele Free-to-Play-Titel. Sowas wie Smite, sowas wie, ja, LOL, Dota, keine Ahnung. Das ist alles Free-to-Play. Und die finanzieren sich ja auch. Die finanzieren sich natürlich anders. Die haben halt dieses, MMOs, wobei MMOs nicht alle Free-to-Play sind, das stimmt auch nicht. Es gibt Free-to-Play-MMOs, ja, aber es gibt auch MMOs, da musst du halt bei WoW jeden Monat payen. Kann man machen, klar, dafür hast du halt deinen Content, dafür kannst du spielen. Wenn du da drin bist, warum nicht? Aber so MOBAs sind meist, also sind glaube ich alle Free-to-Play, die finanzieren sich ja komplett anders. Ne, da geht's ja darum, dass du halt in-game Sachen kaufst für echt Geld. Keine Ahnung. Gems, Skins, weiß der Geier was, oder halt irgendein einen Pass, damit du halt alle Helden hast oder whatever. Damit finanzieren die sich und die halten sich ja auch irgendwie über Wasser. Ne? Oder fahren Gewinne ein, laufen nicht schlecht. Ich denke aber, das ist kein Geschäftsmodell, was für die meisten Spiele funktioniert. Also ich denke, für so Singleplayer-Games funktioniert das einfach nicht. Denke ich mir. Und ja, die meisten MMOs, aber halt nicht alle. Manche MMOs, wie Guild Wars zum Beispiel, sind ja auch von dieser monatlichen Paywall, die du hast, weggegangen auf Free-to-Play. Oder eines, also meiner liebsten MMOs zum Beispiel, Star Wars The Old Republic, bietet dir beides an. Du kannst Free-to-Play spielen, du kannst aber auch sagen, okay, du bezahlst für einen Monat, für 3 Monate oder halt jeden Monat einfach. Hast dann, verstehe ich dann auch irgendwo, hast ein paar Boni. Mehr als andere. Wobei das da nicht ins Gewicht fällt, weil das sind ja meistens Spiele, da sind zwar auch andere, du kannst auch Duelle machen und so ein Scheiß, aber du spielst ja deine Story oder machst halt Raids oder was weiß ich. Aber ich denke, Leuten die Möglichkeit zu geben, ein Spiel auch komplett kostenlos zu spielen. Du hast Inhalte, die kriegst du einfach. Es gibt DLCs, die musst du kaufen. Aber die Möglichkeit zu bieten, gerade bei MMOs, sich auszuwählen oder sich selber wählen zu können, ey, ich bezahle dafür Geld jeden Monat oder du nimmst es for free, hast dann aber ein bisschen weniger oder bist begrenzt in deinem Inventar oder weiß ich nicht, finde ich dann schon okay. Weil wenn du genau das Gleiche kriegst wie jemand, der bezahlt, warum solltest du dann bezahlen? So, ne? Und dann sind ja MMOs, die Free-to-Play sind, aber du etliche Chars und Accounts fürs Grinden und Farming brauchst. Alle Free-to-Play-Spieler, wenn du Progress machen willst und nicht payen willst, kannst. Ja, gut, das gibt's auch. Ne? Bei SWTOR zum Beispiel, also bei Star Wars, da ist es so, du hast einen bestimmten Amount of Characters, die du machen kannst, wenn du Free-Player bist. Ich glaube 5, 6 oder 8. Ich weiß es nicht genau. Du kannst auch nicht alle Rassen wählen. Gut, das ist so ein Ding. Ja, die kannst du dir freikaufen, wenn du willst, aber das ist so ein Ding, das, ja, muss man wissen. Das mit den Amount of Characters finde ich völlig fein, dass du halt nur eine bestimmte Anzahl hast, wenn du bezahlst. Also es reicht, um, ich glaube, alles spielen zu können, um jede Klasse, um jede Story mal spielen zu können. Wenn du bezahlst, dann hast du einfach mehr Charaktere. Ja, und wie gesagt, du hast halt ein paar Boni im Spiel selbst. Du kannst mehr Items, du hast einfach mehr Items, du kannst mehr Geld haben. Das Geld geht ja nicht verloren, das wird für dich gesaved und du kannst es freischalten. Oder wenn du dann sagst, du bezahlst jetzt, dann kriegst du das Geld gut geschrieben. Das ist ja dann nicht weg. Aber das finde ich dann irgendwo noch eine faire Maßnahme, dass man sagt, okay, wir bieten euch beide Modelle an. Mach, was du möchtest, nimm eins davon. Aber wenn du bezahlst, dann hast du natürlich gewisse Vorteile und das finde ich auch völlig in Ordnung, weil, wie gesagt, wenn ich jetzt genau das gleiche Game hätte, warum sollte ich dann bezahlen? Wenn ich das gleiche kriege, finde ich bezahlen so, ne? Und wenn du natürlich dann, ja, finde ich allgemein scheiße, wenn du grinden musst und dafür andere Accounts oder Charaktere oder whatever brauchst, finde ich ja eh schon dumm. So. Das ist ja auch künstlich Strecken von Inhalt.
When games make tons of money, and Epic has proved this point, Fortnite has made so much money they didn't need the game to be paid for in the first place. The Other, for example, was at £16 for the first 5 years of this game coming out. The game currently is £20. It is £20 and it still ends up selling tons every year. But how did a game that is £16 per game that you're buying of Minecraft
Aber stimmt, wenn die
end
an
up
einem
becoming
Punkt sind,
one
wo
of the
die
most
sich
profitable
bezahlt
games in
haben,
history?
wo die alles raus haben, auch für zukünftige Sachen, dann haben die ja ausgesorgt für das Game, ne? Ist ja auch top.
So it can be done as long as games are actually good enough, have a great gameplay loop, and there is actually quality changes that are happening. It doesn't need to always be about making your game as profitable as possible. Releasing a new Call of Duty every year at £60 a year, charging a ridiculous amount of money for season passes, and then shoving in tons of microtransactions. The games don't need to be like that. Focus on making a good game first, and then you can justify charging that money. Like I previously discussed, I do believe one of the biggest issues in gaming right now is the creativity being stomped out by monetary
Finde ich bei Anno aber
gain,
noch
as both should work in tandem together. The better your game is, the higher chances it will sell well. Good reviews end up turning into more and more money. It's a blatantly obvious fact that has been shown time and time again, which is a shift I think we might be seeing and I will discuss in a moment, but that is not where we're at right now. But the last 2 points that I want to make when it comes to gaming today is the lack of fun and how the older I get, the more critical I became of games. Now the first part I think is something that a lot of us can agree on no matter what, which is that gaming just isn't as fun anymore to play for long periods of time. I can't play games for more than 2 hours at a time without feeling either drained or as if I've just wasted 2 hours of my life. The only time that doesn't happen is if I had a really great time. Be that with my friends or a game that's been so compelling, when I end up turning it off, I just want to continue playing, which again has been very rare over the last 5 years. When my friends end up playing games for like 4 hours straight, it just feels weird to me now. I used to be able to do it so much and I just can't now. I've got a bad relationship when it comes to productivity within games, which I've discussed previously, but I will make a video on at some point. But when it comes to it, I just end up feeling annoyed at myself, typically because I feel like I've wasted time. But also, I always end up on edge afterwards just because of the way I have to be like zoned in so heavily with games for me to care about them in any way. Everything about me when I play games just becomes more negative, and this is an issue that's not just with me. The amount of times I have conversations with people who talk about quitting games, and from my own experience of when I quit for like half a year during 2019, I end up thinking back to that time quite often, and I just think about how generally I was a lot happier. Maybe that's because gaming is more of an addiction for me, and that I have to try and toe the line between it and not let it spiral. But really, I don't know. I could be addicted to games, and that's the reason why I have a negative issue and try my best not to play them as much. I know that I sink too much time into them when I get into them, and that's why I typically don't let myself play games that much. But then there's the critical side. I became more critical of games over the years, and now I have a channel where the main piece of content that I focus on is big video game essays. But when you get older, you start to realize more and more about the gaming.
Man ist halt deutlich kritischer geworden, was Spiele angeht, weil man vieles halt auch, wie gesagt, schon gesehen hat. Aber das sind halt immer auch, ja, viele persönliche Dinge. Ich fand zum Beispiel, das war, könnte man sagen, auch eine lange Mission, aber sie war halt cool gemacht, weil du halt so reingezogen wurdest in die, in den wilden Westen, sage ich mal. Ne? Du hast dich halt gefühlt als wilder Westen. Nee, als Cowboy. So.
World as a whole than you ever saw beforehand when you were younger. You see the legalities of it, the acquisitions, the way staff get treated, and much more, and it ends up giving you such a negative point of view on many different games that the younger version of your naive self that used to trash on games like Call of Duty Ghosts, for example, because your favorite YouTuber was telling you it's awful, just didn't know about. You're basically ending up falling into the trap of everyone else's belief systems, obviously, because that's just how things work anyway, but in turn, it's something that all of us fall into the trap of nowadays. If a game gets released and it doesn't live up to an expectation that you had, even if they didn't set that expectation, you'll have a critical viewpoint of it. And then obviously you have the latter half of people's viewpoints, which is the idea that you should just be grateful for what you got, which is a stance that I don't agree with either. All of this ends up adding up until the day that you feel as if everything you dislike has a justifiable criticism. And now we just end up playing games in hope that we're going to be able to catch lightning in a bottle twice and relive our childhood, and to be honest, as bad as it is to say, it just won't ever happen.
Hey, Spieler 1,
Aber
bist du bereit für das hier?
warum ist im Background immer nur Red Dead Redemption zu sehen?
Komm zu Valorant und
Das würde
spiel
ich
einen der
kritisieren, dass es da
diversen
keine
Agenten.
Abwechslung gibt.
Before I talk about some of the more positive aspects
kommen
of
wir
why
dann.
I
Also man
think
muss sich nur beschweren, dann
gaming
kommen wir was
isn't
anderes.
dead, or at least we're entering a world where gaming is becoming a little bit better. I also want to talk about some of the outliers over the last 4 years, and I'm also going to compare it against...
Das ist aber auch ein gutes Beispiel. Das Spiel macht viel, was andere auch machen, aber es wirkt besser, weil es wirkt dynamischer, interaktiver, weil du halt ja tatsächlich überall hin kannst, ne? Du kannst halt nicht nur unten am Boden irgendwo sein, du kannst auch einfach nach oben. In die Höhe gehen. In die Breite und alles. Wobei das hier schon, das ist Konsole. Das sieht hier nämlich ziemlich ugly aus. Wenn ich mal ehrlich bin. Das ist nicht schön. Ne, also PC besser, muss man sagen.
2010 to 2014. The reason why I did this is because, again, I consider that 5-year gap 2010 to 2015 as the Renaissance era, and then 2016 to 2021, for example, as the just everything being released for the sake of making tons and tons of money. But during that period, even if you took 2016 to then 2020, you're still going to have the same result that I've come to realize from this list. As really, during 2018 to 2022, it hasn't all been doom and gloom. We know that. I think the best way of talking about a lot of these games is in order of release. I found about 8 games on the lists of games that came out in the last 4 years. They've actually been standout games, which works out to 2 games a year, which isn't bad. But when you look at the years between 2010 and 2014 with games like Red Dead 1, Halo Reach, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Black Ops 1, Arkham City, Skyrim, Deus Ex Human Revolution, Modern Warfare 3, Dishonored, Borderlands 2, Mass Effect...
Boah, Dishonored 2 zum Kotzen. Irgendeine Mission hat mich so hart getriggert und ich hab's nie wieder gespielt, weil mich das richtig angepisst hat. Das ist ein super geiles Game. Ich habe gar nicht aufgepasst, weil ich gerade was gesucht habe.
Games like Red Dead 1.
Geiles Spiel, Red Dead 1. Top.
Halo Reach.
Das habe ich gespielt, ist ein cooles Game, macht Spaß.
Assassin's Creed Brotherhood.
Brotherhood macht Spaß.
Black Ops 1. Arkham City.
Arkham City. Geiles Spiel.
Skyrim. Deus Ex Human Revolution.
Cooles Spiel.
Modern Warfare 3.
Kenn ich
Dishonored.
nicht.
Borderlands
Cool.
2. Mass Effect
Cool.
3.
Cool.
Far Cry 3.
Cool.
Halo 4.
Keine Ahnung, kenn ich nicht.
Black Ops
Kenn ich
2.
nicht.
Hitman Absolution, Sleeping
Kenn ich
Dogs, Last of Us,
Geil.
GTA 5,
Geil.
Bioshock
Geil.
Infinite,
Geil.
Assassin's Creed
Infinite. Ja, war cool. Black Flag. Geil.
Black Flag, Pokémon X und Y,
Kenn ich
Crisis
nicht.
3,
Schmutz wahrscheinlich. War cool. War nicht geil, war cool.
Shadow of
War-
Mordor, Destiny
geil.
1, Far Cry
Destiny. Scheiße. Die Bodentexturen sind einfach ugly as fuck. Far Cry 4 war
4,
cool.
Titanfall 1 und
Das war okay. Ganz ehrlich, war okay.
Dark Souls 2. All of those Mordor, Destiny 1, Far Cry 4, Titanfall 1 and Dark Souls 2. All
Schmutz.
of those games came out between that 4-year span. And some of those games are somewhere within the
Dark
good
Souls
and amazing.
2? Eieiei. Ja gut, persönliche Meinung. Das war ein geiles Game.
Category.
Das
But
war
again,
cool. Freue ich
let's
mich auch
talk
auf den
about
zweiten
the
Teil.
outliers, as I do believe they do deserve some level of conversation anyway. The list itself is Red Dead 2, God of War, Spider-Man, Star Wars Fallen Order, Ghost of Tsushima, Last of Us Part 2, It Takes Two, and Elden Ring. The first game on this list that I'm going to talk about is Red Dead 2. If you want to see a full video essay
zwei
talking about
Spiele.
this, make sure to go check out the
Weiß ich
3-hour-long
nicht.
video that I
Persönliche
put out.
Meinung,
But anyway,
aber
let's
sehe
continue
ich nicht
on
so.
this topic. This game to me stood out for 2 main reasons: the quality of the product and the story itself within
Witcher
the game.
3
Now, the
fehlt
game
aber.
was a massive jump in quality, and we haven't seen this jump since GTA 5 came out. And it's something that only a company like Rockstar can do, in my opinion. The game world feels real, and the story is also amazingly well told. This game's world is something that no other game has been able to pull off, which is a relatively boring time in history,
Ich wünsche dir eine gute Nacht.
that is appealing to just walk
Danke
around
fürs
in
Dasein.
due
Ich will
to
danach aber
random
auch
encounters
aufgehen.
within the game and utilizing the 40
Sind noch
second
15
rule very
Minuten.
well.
Du wolltest
Then
es
you have
sehen,
a
jetzt
game
muss ich
like
das
God of War,
durchhalten.
which is again another game that is considered one of the best
Und
games
dann
and
gehe ich auch
beat
auf.
Red Dead 2 as
Reicht.
Game of the Year for 2018, which is a story about
Aus 2
father
Stunden,
and
ich habe
son
jetzt 3
bonding
Stunden
together.
Videos
I
geguckt.
haven't fully played the game yet, so I'm not going to talk
Reicht ja
too
wohl.
much about it, but from general consensus, this game is considered one of the best and most amazing stories
Ich
told.
wünsche dir aber
And the
eine
reason why
angenehme
this
Nacht.
game performed so well is because they were able to do 2 things very
Danke,
well
danke.
together. They mixed
Schlaf
the
gut.
gamer's love of skull-crushing
Man
enemies
liest dich
with an
morgen.
axe and a story that is relatable on many levels. It's a game that I can't wait to play, and when I do, like I mentioned, I will be making a video out of it, as it's something that I always hear about over and over again. Then you have Spider-Man, which is a game that, again, I love for 2 reasons. Its narrative was really enjoyable, and I think they pulled off a story about Spider-Man in a game and made loads of villains work really well together, without it feeling as if they cut any corners. But also because they took what they knew worked from the Arkham franchise and just gave it to Spider-Man with a little bit of a twist with a new story that again was believable and was one of the actual most heart-wrenching stories I've played in a good while. Again, it's just another standout of these times. You've then got Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which I will be making again another big video about it. But if you want some views of this game,
Der ist
I
halt
do have a
wirklich
video
gut.
talking about
Also,
the importance
der
of
vor
this
allem.
game, as I do
Das
truly
Spiel
believe
ist
this is one
echt
of the most
geil.
important games to come out recently. As to me, what
Mach Pause. Das Spiel ist wirklich gut. Und ich glaube, der zweite Teil wird auch geil. Hoffe
This
ich.
game pulled off was proving to everyone that EA were wrong about the industry at large, that single-player games were not profitable. They believed that, they thought single-player gaming was dead, and what did they do? They released a single-player game, which is one of their best-selling games when it comes to anything close to what they did with FIFA, for example, or The Sims. Then you've got Ghost of Tsushima, which again is...
Da haben sie es aber gesehen bei EA, dass die tatsächlich, die wollten keine Singleplayer-Spiele mehr machen, weil lohnt sich nicht. Komisch.
Another game that I think
Die haben Anthem gemacht, war ein absoluter Reinfall und das Spiel war einfach echt gut. Also Ghost of Tsushima auch, aber Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order war
round
halt
to
echt
playing. I do
nice.
have it, so I will be playing it very soon. However, everything that I hear about the game is what people praise Assassin's Creed for, but they've done so much better within this game than the likes of Odyssey or Valhalla. The lack of Assassin's Creed in the title, obviously because it's not made by Ubisoft, made it an open-world game that people enjoyed without feeling like they were forced to take a specific
Ich
path.
glaube jetzt
This
auch nur
game
7
showed for
Minuten.
one of the first times a true samurai story that you've ever seen in gaming. And then you have The Last of Us Part 2, which yes, it was one of the more controversial ones on this list. I do think though the game excelled in one thing, and that was quality. This game showed us how amazing a game can look and how great quality they can make a
Das ist so ein Unterschied. Das ist die Konsolenversion. Ich weiß jetzt nicht, ich denke mal, das wird die PS4-Version sein. Alter, das sieht auf dem PC so viel besser aus. Das ist unglaublich einfach, ne? Das ist tatsächlich, das ist 10 Jahre alt, das Spiel. 13 Jahre, ich glaube 2010 kam das raus, ne? Immer noch Meilenstein. Also es ist immer noch ein Meisterwerk. Es ist so ein gutes Spiel, das ist richtig gutes Storytelling. Weil nicht immer alles wischiwaschi ist, ne?
game stand out in comparison to every single game out there, from a visual standpoint and video game acting standpoint.
Und das ist der zweite Teil, ich bin mir nicht sicher. Auch der zweite Teil ist gut, aber man sieht hier das Konsole.
I know that people hate the game for some justifiable reasons. For example, obviously the storytelling is a little bit lackluster over
das ist der
the,
erste.
the constant up and downs of the story.
Das ist der
But it's
erste
something that I
Teil.
will be talking about again in a future video. It Takes Two is a game that's very simple to explain why people loved it so much, and that is because over the last 8 years, couch co-op gaming has basically just fallen
Auch
into the
richtig geiles
sidelines.
Spiel.
No games are really made with co-op in mind anymore, at least couch co-op gaming, to the point where many different Call of Duties don't even have it as a feature.
Ähnlich wie A Way Out, auch richtig cooles Game, halt Koop, halt auch auf Koop ausgelegt. Man muss zusammenarbeiten und das macht halt einfach so viel Spaß und das hebt das Ganze so auf ein ganz anderes neues Level einfach.
Feature anymore. Whereas this game was actually great fun to play, and it was just something that reminded me of playing games like Halo 3, for example, playing through the campaign with me and my friend sat there. Then you have Elden Ring, which does everything right. Most things anyway. I don't really want to get too much into Elden Ring, as I feel like every single YouTuber on the planet has spoken about this game very well, but I did want to talk about how they basically took the idea of open world gaming and explored it to the very heart of the concept. I don't even know personally what's going on half the time when I'm running around in the world itself, but I end up finding myself just enjoying the time that I spend running around the map. It was a game that was just a step up across the board in terms of everything from a gameplay perspective. There's not been touched anywhere near within the last 2 years. But all of those games have two things in common. They're all pretty much single player games, besides It Takes Two. But to me, that game is a couch co-op game, so it's not single player obviously because you're playing with another person, but to me it's meant to be played as a couch co-op experience, so it's close to single player. All of these games though were either a one-up of everything that came before, or had an amazing compelling narrative, and sometimes both. And most of the games nowadays aren't doing that. They just try to make what they knew worked before and keep making it over and over again, hoping people still care about it if you make it look slightly different. So instead of improving the baseline of what they consider good enough, they try
Assassin's Creed Rogue fand ich nicht so geil. War okay, aber
to
fand
improve
ich nicht so
side
geil.
areas that truly don't matter as much. But I'm actually hopeful. I think many of these games
Ist die Werbung auch schneller? Nee, ne?
show a reason, and Elden Ring is one of the first ones. Now, in terms of any game that has broken any of the current world beliefs of gaming, I think Elden Ring is the modern-day standout of what people want in a game. This game proved to the world that companies can release great games that live up to the hype. It's one of the two games, in my opinion, that was able to set aside this idea, and Red Dead 2 is the other game in
Ich
there.
finde, vom
Every single game
Kämpfen ist es
besides
wie
that
Dark
either failed to
Souls
live up to the hype or
schon,
had no hype at all, which again is fine.
aber
I
die
think hype is what
Welt
kills
ist,
a lot of games, to be
ist
honest.
mir, also
This
mir
game
ist
was able
es
to
zu
prove
groß.
everyone wrong in the idea of what gaming companies are like. They didn't need a ton of microtransactions to make a load of money. It doesn't need to be full of multiplayer mechanics where obviously you can play online, but you don't need to do it. It proved that people do care just about having a good game over a game that fits everyone's needs. Not only this though, but all the games that I mentioned earlier, like I mentioned, were all single-player games. Why is it that we haven't had a truly great game since Fortnite when it comes to a multiplayer perspective that brings everyone in? You might say, oh well, Warzone did it. Warzone kind of did for like 2 months during a lockdown period where they got very lucky with the time and setting of what the world was like when it released. Or you could say Apex, but again, it's a battle royale that sure, people do care about, but it isn't on the same level as what Warzone was on, or Fortnite. Really, the only game coming out that most people want to play when it comes to a battle royale at this point will be Warzone 2.0. I just don't feel like right now there is any big multiplayer game that people can actually rally behind and find amazing, which is then leading to more people experiencing a load of these single-player games that they just didn't decide to play because they loved playing the new Call of Duty every year. Solo games, though, are starting to make a comeback, or at least I think they are. Personally, I see more and more people becoming more and more hyped for single-player games than multiplayer games. I think that is for a good reason, though. A lot of gamers have come to the realization that multiplayer games are great for their main function, enjoyment together and having a competitive edge, but almost all of the games lack one thing, and that is depth. When the only games that you play are multiplayer, and maybe you play a little bit more than some of your friends play, and you're a little bit more addicted than they
Ja,
are,
aber mehr
you start to
Tiefe
become
als
more
andere
and
Spiele
more
hat's auch
down the
nicht.
stream, which I would class as gaming
Finde
depression,
ich.
which is where you basically only play a subset of games under
Also
the
andere
illusion that you're
Souls
enjoying
games.
the game, when in reality, you do not enjoy it by any means. You just can't imagine not playing it. But with single-player games, you're allowed to actually enjoy something for more than just the gameplay. You get to enjoy a story, a narrative, a world, something that really a lot of the single-player games that you will want to play have amazing and have been doing great things for such a long time within those areas. Look at all the communities around some of the most best-selling games and franchises and films and everything in the world. All of them have rabid fan bases because they have depth.
Also von den Souls-like-Games finde ich tatsächlich Bloodborne eins der besten. Einfach vom Design, auch die Welt, Story dahinter finde ich schon mit das Beste. Für mich persönlich.
Not because they're shallow. Now, not only is the gaming world becoming more and more changed due to people loving story content, but you also have gaming companies being held way more accountable than they've ever been for the actions that they cause. The games that I'll discuss in this are things like Cyberpunk, Fallout 76, Warzone, and The Last of Us Part 2. All of these games shared a level of public backlash and companies knowing that they had messed up, which is a good thing. I don't believe companies should be held to such views where they can't do anything right, as there's always a way to improve every single game, but I believe that when something is truly bad, it does need to be called out. And the companies do need to be held accountable for. Money is
Das ist
what
auch
they're
heute
after when
noch
it
ein
comes to any games
unglaublich
coming out.
gutes
And the only
Spiel.
way that you can truly tell them and make them aware that the games they're releasing suck is just by not buying their games, and the money is what is backing them more than anything. Which ends up coming down to us as the customer base having to make these decisions. Cyberpunk is the best example of this ever to exist, and we've already talked about this before in the gaming community at large. But what it ended up proving is that if you release a game that is as broken as it was, as unfinished, no matter what the company's reputation prior was, you can't get away with releasing a terrible game. When I heard about Cyberpunk about 6 months before its release, I remember talking to my friends on a bike ride, and I said to them, this game will die purely because there is too much hype around it. It's for the same reason why I'm scared for a game like Elder Scrolls 6, because I want the game to be amazing. However, I know that the closer and closer we get, the community will become so ridiculously over the top about what they expect for this game that it could end up killing the game before it even releases. However, the game wasn't
Unity war auch so ein Spiel, das hatte sehr viele Schwierigkeiten am Anfang. Ne? War okay, war nicht großartig. Da wurde die Reihe irgendwie schlechter, finde ich. War okay, wie gesagt, war okay, man konnte gut spielen, als es dann später ging, oder jetzt, heutzutage, aber zum Release, boah. Ich hatte da schon einen starken Rechner, es ging, aber es hatte Bugs ohne Ende, es war unglaublich, ne? Viele Freezes und einfach Glitches, die das Spiel teilweise unmöglich machten. Performance war shitty as fuck, also schwierig.
killed just solely down to the hype. I don't think that's all you can blame it down to. I think the game was awful primarily because of two reasons. The game was way too ambitious, but also the higher-ups pushed out a game way before it was anywhere near finished.
Ich meine, es ist beeindruckend, wie viele Leute animiert werden konnten, aber ja, ist überambitioniert, das ist schon richtig. Es war einfach zu viel für die Zeit und zu schnell. Weil fertig war das Spiel nicht.
They ended up believing they could do more than they could actually handle. Cyberpunk was in development before The Witcher 3 was out anyway, and I do think that they had an ambition for that game, and once The Witcher 3 came out and did amazingly well, their ego probably grew a little bit too big. But the company was proved wrong, and that took a massive hit on their reputation, and they made another massive hit against the company and the value of the company. So they definitely won't be making the same mistake as they did with Cyberpunk ever again, and I think there is going to be a very rare instances where companies will come close to doing the same thing. Fallout 76 is the next game that didn't hit the mark on what they promised initially. By many miles, everyone knows this game is just somehow clinging to life, which is now being given full control.
Ein bisschen schade, dass man nicht die Szenen von dem Spiel sieht. Weil Fallout 76 war echt wack. Also das war wirklich wack. Das war... Habe ich mich eigentlich drauf gefreut, weil ich mag Fallout als Reihe. Aber Fallout 76, boah, irgendwie war das... Eigentlich würde das gut in eine Open World passen sogar. Aber irgendwie es war nicht so cool umgesetzt. Ich fand es auch eher langweilig als gut.
Control to by the people who made Rust. Another game in this list as well with multiplayer games is Warzone. It's a game that was so broken that people loved the game, but when it started to alter people's overall views, it wasn't just big streamers that were affected by people who stream sniped, for example. It was because every game that you played, 1 in 3 chances, you were going to be running into bugs or hackers. It was ridiculous, it was stupid, and there's not been a game that's come that close to as bad of a multiplayer reputation as Warzone 1.0. After 2 lackluster releases from Call of Duty, they ended up having to take a year off, and that is one thing that people did want them to do for a while. Take a year off and release a game that actually is good. For a company like Activision not to release a new game is another proof of concept that the world is changing in the world of gaming, and that companies are being held accountable way more than they were 5 years ago. And then you have The Last of Us 2, which is one of the games that honestly, it's an anomaly that I mentioned, however also the story was heavily polarizing. And one thing that this game proved is that you can't just release a narrative that you believe is good when a lot of your players are not the people who are going to love the nuance of playing as the villain when they don't want to play as the person who killed one of the most likable characters ever in gaming.
Ich hätte gerne in Hogwarts Legacy, wäre cool gewesen, wenn die einem die Möglichkeit gegeben hätten, wirklich böse zu sein. Egal in welchem Haus jetzt, aber wenn man böse oder nicht so tolle Antworten gibt, dass du dann auch einfach als böse angesehen wirst. Das wäre halt cool gewesen. Also das hätte das nochmal getoppt. Ne? Das war wirklich ein gutes Spiel.
It's not just down to the fact that you're playing as Abby that was the issue, it's the fact that she was generally just unlikable. The story itself flows so in and out all over the time, and going up and down like as if you're on a full-blown roller coaster is ridiculous. And what Last of Us 2 proved yet again is that even if you aced the first game, it doesn't mean you'll be able to do it twice. The fans know more than the creators. That's one thing that people do get wrong sometimes. I believe that the idea that customers don't know what they want until they're shown it. However, I do also believe the idea that fans, if there is that much backlash about something you've done in the game, you have messed up. The other issue with The Last of Us 2 was just that it was a really depressing game. The first game had hope within it. The second game doesn't. There is none of it. Now that we're in the conclusion part of this video, let's just talk about some things just off the top of my head. I'm very aware that obviously gaming is not dead from a monetary standpoint. I also don't believe gaming is necessarily dead. I think we're now entering a new stage where companies are being held accountable for what they make for the first time, properly anyway, because obviously there was accountability beforehand, but nowadays gaming has got so much more of a bigger light on it, and its market share dominates now in the entertainment community, or at least is heavily dominant, let's say. But really, it's something that they now actually have to look into is making good games. And another thing I want to mention within this, and it's something that I will make a video on properly, which is when I'm talking about gaming being a waste of time, I don't believe that it's solely a waste of time just because obviously you could be doing so much better with it. Because that's the issue for myself, is when I play games, I end up down this belief that, I could be doing so much better things for myself. However, I then realize that obviously, would I actually be doing the things I think I would be doing when not playing games? Probably not. But also, I do stand by the idea that for you to enjoy life, you have to have downtime in between the moments of being absurdly productive. So it's not the case that I think everything is awful and that you shouldn't play games. I do love games, so don't worry about that. And the other thing is that I do think that there are companies out there that do want to release good games. I do think that companies are wanting to currently make great games again that have a great, interesting narrative, purely because if they don't, they're failing nowadays. If you do not make a game with a great narrative and all that it's got going for it is multiplayer, it may work for some. However, if you want to dominate a market, which most games want to do, they don't want to just take a little portion of it. They want the whole thing, or at least as much as they can take. They don't need to release a lackluster story with a good multiplayer. That's not how it works. Just release both and have them at a good standard as well. Now, that all being said, this is the end of the video now, so obviously if you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and do subscribe for more content.
Ja, ich denke mal, das ist, was man vorher schon gesagt hat. Es ist halt schwierig, wirklich gute Spiele zu machen. Vielleicht geht das wieder in eine Richtung, wo die Entwickler sich auch selber als Fans sehen. Das wäre halt schön, weil dann denken sie nicht, was Fans haben wollen, sondern dann als selber Fans, dann wissen sie, was die haben wollen. So, das wäre halt das Optimale. Wird man sehen, ob das so sein wird oder nicht. Spiele sind halt schwierig, ne? Oder die Spieler sind schwierig. Keine Ahnung. Irgendwie so. Für mich war es das jetzt aber. Ich habe jetzt über 3 Stunden Videos geguckt. Das reicht wohl. Muss ja auch irgendwie geschnitten werden. Oder für YouTube aufbrennen. Whatever. Ja. An der Stelle bedanke ich mich jetzt. Und mache nochmal Ansprache. Und würde sagen, ja. Ich hoffe, übermorgen müsste das neue DBX kommen. Dann ist es auch wieder ein bisschen besser. Oder fühle ich mich besser sprechen. Und höre nicht mehr den ganzen Raum auf meinen Kopfhörern. Sehr schön. Morgen müsste ein anderes Mikro kommen, das will ich einfach nur mal testen. Vielleicht behalte ich es, vielleicht nicht, ich weiß es noch nicht. Ja, wie gesagt, Spiele. Spielt, was ihr wollt. Habt Bock. Wenn andere das Spiel scheiße finden, macht's ja nichts. Euch muss es gefallen. Egal, was es ist. Auch wenn es ein Dark Souls 2 ist. Oder ein Elden Ring. Oder irgendein anderes Spiel, was ich nicht gut finde. Aber ihr. Das ist ja scheißegal. Jeder muss das spielen, was er möchte. Dafür sind so viele Spiele da. Und ich denke, jeder kann aus irgendeinem Spiel so sein Ding rausziehen, was er gerne hätte. Und das ist ein gutes Schlusswort. Und deswegen raiden wir jetzt mal rüber, weil ich mache jetzt Schluss. Ich gehe jetzt mit meinem Hund raus und werde mir... Was mache ich denn hier für eine Scheiße? Und werde mir dann eventuell noch was zu essen machen. Ich muss mal gucken. Und noch ein bisschen was angucken, ne? Und ich wünsche eine wundervolle, angenehme Nacht. Schlaft gut. Ich denke, wie gesagt, morgen müsste ein neues Mikro kommen. Ich weiß nicht, ob ich morgen streame. Es kann sein, ich muss mir noch ein Spiel überlegen. Vielleicht Ghostwire Tokyo, vielleicht aber auch was anderes. Keine Ahnung. Mal schauen. Lassen wir uns überraschen. Es wird aber wahrscheinlich erst ab abends. Vielleicht 17:30 rum. Vielleicht dann auch mit Nico was. Mal gucken. Ich weiß es noch nicht. Wie gesagt, gute Nacht. Schönen Abend noch. Gute Nacht, wie auch immer. Wir gehen jetzt zu Peggy. Tschüss.